When one of us says, "Look, there's nothing out there," what we are really saying is, "I cannot see." Terry Tempest Williams. Read, Passion and Patience in the Desert. The Daily Grind, Chapter 160. "Too many turns," Alana growled as she took a corner at high speed, clipping a lamppost with the car and crumbling a chunk out of the side of the pylon. As it turned out, small towns didn't have a lot of straightaways you could accelerate down, and it was even worse when the city was under attack. Not from the last line of defense, either. All around them, the wreckage of every car that had been in motion littered the sides of the streets. Asphalt grew from the roads and climbed the buildings like black vines and spikes, sometimes jerking suddenly to stab toward motion with wicked thorns. It tried that repeatedly against their cars, but Anesh was using the last of his charges of manipulate asphalt to shield them, for now, and Elle just didn't fucking care, letting her car take hits in places that would have demolished a normal vehicle, but for her just healed over in seconds. The main cost was in momentum, but the assault stopped once whatever was in control realized it couldn't hurt them. It was wrong. If it had kept going it would have, but it realized it anyway. Elle knew where they were going, and she led them toward one of the main roads that crossed across the city. Aside from the wreckage around them, there was no sign of other people, alive or dead. Nothing attacked them but the road itself. They just moved as fast as possible, keeping James's velocity topped off as he slowly shaped the massive asphalt that he had ripped up from a wobbly ball into a real weapon. The place looked like a war zone. One a week after the fighting had happened, though. Nothing was even really on fire, despite the explosions, which put Alana even more on edge as she kept her eyes peeled, drawing on the other part of Anesh's ability that James wasn't using to keep herself alert. Anesh just sat in the back seat, sluggish and a little bleary, waiting for them to need him for more than just his buffs, a human battery of improvements for his two partners. They were still doing about 50 miles an hour, an irresponsible speed in streets like this when the other car nearly blindsided them. It was as they blew through a red light at a weirdly angled intersection. Elle blinked as they plowed through, ignoring the traffic light on the street devoid of people anyway, and the next thing she knew, there was a scratched-up white SUV alongside her car, almost bumping into the driver's side door. "Shit!" she heard herself yelling, and could practically feel Alana echoing the word as the trailing vehicle behind her wavered in the street. The other car wasn't trying to flag them down, it wasn't looking for help, it was intentionally matching speed, which meant they'd known where their cars were going to be, which didn't point to anything good. Elle's worries were confirmed basically right away as the windows on the SUV rolled down and a pair of wary men popped themselves up and leveled guns at her, yelling something she couldn't hear over the engine and the road. "Is this entire fucking city in this fucking shit cult? Cam!" Elle yelled, jerking her head at the people who were now shooting, leaving pockmarks on her rear windows as they failed to understand how guns worked while driving. "Get 'em!" And then, a second later, Elle added another command. "Siri," she yelled at her phone, "play Offspring's Bad Habit." If she was going to be dying, she was going to be dying to a decent soundtrack. "Are we sparing these ones too?" Camille asked, as she somehow seamlessly slid between the front seats to the cramped bench in the back of the car. And she did it while wearing plate mail, the thick slabs of metal not even brushing the seats, much less catching on anything. Elle didn't answer. She saw and heard as Alana slammed the corner of her bumper into the other car, trying to execute a pit maneuver, but the enemy vehicle was holding steady, and Alana couldn't slow down to try it again, or James would run out of velocity. Velocity. Elle gave a terrified, wild grin to herself. She had some of that too. And she had a spell to use it on that was excellent for being chased by high-speed, aggressive assholes. An engine hums eternal. She didn't need to mutter the words, but she did anyway, and the invisible thrumming power seeped out of her chest and into the frame of the nature of the car around her. Then they were going 100 miles an hour. Speed nearly doubled in a heartbeat, leaving the pursuit behind in a flash. If she'd done it by pressing down the gas pedal, Elle would have been dead as soon as the road took a moderately sharp curve in about 2 seconds, but she hadn't done that. She'd done it with magic, and it didn't just amp up her speed, but it gave her car and her fingers the reaction time to manage it. "Tell them to get clear," Camille ordered Elle, voice perfectly audible without having to yell at all. Elle frantically called through the radio as fast as possible and watched in her rear view as Alana whipped her car over to the side of the road, nearly clipping one of the derelicts. She considered also saying something about using turn signals, but didn't have the nerve right now and didn't trust her voice not to break. People were shooting at her after all. Again. And then, Camille punched out the rear window, the one that wasn't supposed to roll down, or to be hit so hard it popped out of its frame. Elle didn't really like that. She wasn't sure if that would heal back over. That was kind of a lot of her car suddenly crashing into the road behind them. But, as Camille leaned out, her arm extended, and flung her piece of rebar like a throwing axe, Elle decided not to say anything about it. Alana jerked at the wheel of her own car again, pulling their car in a gut-wrenching maneuver as the thick piece of metal scythed through the SUV near them, punching about a half-foot out the back door and bringing with it a spray of blood that left a thin trail down the side windows. The driver was dead instantly. At least one gunman had been hit as well, and the force of the impact, combined with a sudden lack of control, had the car veering to the right and down a little embankment next to the road, slamming into a wet ditch with a screeching crash. Alana had gotten them out of the way in time, but she wasn't sure if she'd slowed down too much. A quick check showed James still with his eyes closed in focus as he kept their large asphalt gun maneuverable, and Dinesh in the back seat looking like he wanted to throw up. "Elle," Alana yelled into the radio, "we need some kind of straightaway." "Road 6, just ahead," Elle's voice came back, sounding a little queasy herself. "You guys go right, get some speed, U-turn, I'll scout, over." "Now she bloody says it." Anesh looked like he was fighting nausea with grim humor, slowly enunciating his words to avoid tripping over his own tongue. "Got it," Alana said, holding the radio in clenched fingers with the hand still steadying the wheel. "Scream if you need help." The two cars stuck together just long enough for Elle to guide them to the turn, then peeled away. Alana pushed the pedal down, getting them up to speed that could maintain James's weird mana supply, while still letting her weave around the irregular, overturned, or burning vehicles on the road. Elle was mostly right. This one was just a straight line, cutting through the town. It had some hills and light curves, but even though she wasn't a car wizard, Alana knew how to drive normally, and this was well within her abilities. She didn't know exactly how far she should go, but every second was giving James more time to work, and yet, also, more time for whatever was going on to get worse. And more time for mistakes to build up. The road out here, as they passed through one of those underdeveloped spaces between chunks of houses and businesses, was still doing whatever it was doing closer to the city center. Maybe a little slower, but all the same, the black asphalt was spreading from the road out onto the dirt and grass around it with a vile determination. Stone flowing like veins to climb trees and power poles, smothering plant life and generating more and more asphalt, it seemed. It must have been making more. There was no explanation for where it all came from. There was just too much. Alana was just getting to the good part of her self-doubt on when to turn the car around when the radio crackled to life again. This time, the voice that came through was steady and calm. Camille had taken over for this one. "Eleanor asks you return to assist us," she said simply, in that scratchy yet composed voice of hers. "We have located the first guardian." Alana was frowning as she pulled the car through a U-turn, constantly hoping James kept control of the increasingly dangerous spear he seemed to be building outside their car. She still didn't remember a lot, and she wasn't sure if this was the kind of thing he was good at. Not in the way that she knew that Rufus was a good listener or Anesh was really good in bed, so she just had to trust that no matter what happened, James would pull through for them. Which felt so familiar, burned in her chest. "That doesn't sound good," Anesh finally spoke from the back seat, reacting to Camille's message. "Sure doesn't," Alana agreed. "You ready?" "Always." Anesh had closed his eyes again, taking deep breaths and steadying his nerves. "This is what we do, after all." He took his time to say the words, the car moving them 10 blocks by the time he'd finished a sentence. "What's one more monster?" he asked. Alana found the comment oddly soothing, and didn't even notice the smile making it to her lips as she gave it some more gas and pushed them back toward their goal. Speed keeping their weird wizard supplied with power even as the wheels rumbled over debris and odd little bumps in the road. Then they crested one of those gentle little hills, and Alana lost any sense of composure that she had managed to build up. Her eyes went wide as in the distance her enhanced sight picked up the frame of Elle's car, and also the thing chasing it. It was a tanker truck. One of those big fuel tankers, a doubled-up trailer of massive silver cylindrical tanks, the kind that were perfectly safe, but everyone was always nervous when they had to pass on the highway. This one was not perfectly safe. It didn't have wheels, or if it did, Alana couldn't see them. Instead, it writhed itself forward, arches of its body rising and slamming into the ground as it pulled itself along. It didn't have 2 tanks, it had 8, all of them far too flexible, too vaguely organic to be a normal Earth-made cargo trailer. Jagged geometric scales of metal plating shone along its coils, catching the light of surviving street lamps and the overhead moon like they were amplifying the beams and not just reflecting them. Streamers of metal and rubber sprouted off of it like coral growths, making what was already a massive, dangerous creation look even more ominous and unapproachable. Where there should have been a trucker's cab, there was instead a streamlined visage, 10 headlights in a ring around the outside blinking in sequence like rippling eyes, a snout with smokestack nostrils and exposed engine pistons along the forehead. It was fast, too. Alana could tell that just by the fact that she could hear Elle's engine from here, and Elle was only barely keeping ahead of the dragon. She had decided, basically immediately, to think of it as a dragon. James? Alana didn't take her foot off the gas, rushing forward to meet their end. But she did have a little bit of trepidation, especially as the massive armored serpent thing paused to belch a gout of yellow-orange flame onto the road, only missing Elle's car by virtue of the girl accelerating so fast it blurred in motion. Alana caught sight of James sitting forward, shifting in his seat, one hand still held out the window over his spear. She had no idea if that was going to be enough, and they really didn't have any other weapon options for something this large, aside from just ramming it with a car and praying. She chose to trust him. She kept her foot down and closed to engagement range with the Guardian. Trust James, trust everyone, including herself, trust in that stupid little chunk of stolen road. It was, by this point, no longer simply a convenient carrying package for material that James could manipulate without interference. Instead, he'd been doing his best to make it into an actual weapon, forged out of necessity, pressure, and magical interference on his part. Every inch of the thing James could feel through his road magic, like it was his own fingers shaping it, different from when he normally used manipulate asphalt. The asphalt had been compressed on the outside, a hard, intensely sharp shell that was designed to shatter on impact, but only after cutting through the first thing it hit. Shortly behind that was more compacted matter, a splitting wedge, contours and angles shaped into exactly what was needed to drive the weapon farther into a target. Deeper in the interior, James had been using the power granted to him by Maker's hand upon the wheel to build an asphalt version of a claymore mine. This was, quite possibly, the worst material to do it with. James had no confidence that it would actually work. It was a nest of coils and springs, held together more with magic than with actual physics. He was pretty sure that if he let go, it might just all snap in half, and if you let go too late, it might do nothing. But, in theory, once the lance was embedded in the target, once it had been hit with the correct amount of force, he could give it a nudge with manipulate asphalt one final time and propel 108 little micro-edged blades that he had been putting together outward in a flurry of damage. They would accomplish relatively little, actually. You could only store so much force in stone, and you could only make an asphalt object so sharp. They wouldn't keep their cutting edge for any length of time, really. It was a million times worse than steel. But that didn't really matter. They weren't fighting a modern military tank, where the exterior armor could soak a dozen hits from something like this and not even notice. They were up against a dungeon construct, which, no matter how weird they were, seemed to have internal organs. James opened his eyes. The Eastern-style dragon, composed out of Western-style tanker trucks, reared back in front of them. Thick cylindrical body arching coils, but carefully not overlapping itself too hard. Its face, the facade of a trucker's cab looking more like a mask it wore than actual features, split apart as it opened a metallic maw. 6 jagged mandibles extended outward to welcome the oncoming vehicle into it. James clenched his hands, feeling the velocity starting to run out. He expended another charge of manipulate asphalt, keeping his mental grip on his lance just long enough to make use of it. Their car flashed past L's, no one even having time to glimpse the faces of the other vehicle's residents as they crossed each other's paths at well over 150 miles an hour of combined speed. The tanker dragon's maw began to glow, a baleful red-orange fire deep in its throat, burning liquid dribbling from the corners of its jaws in fiery little streamers. The lance of unclaimed roadway that James had been hauling this whole way, slowly developing, sharpening, and modifying with the combined ability of 3 different magics, shot forward so fast everyone lost track of it. "Get out of our way," James whispered from the passenger seat. The shot punched into the dragon's middle coil just as James' velocity finally gave out. Slumping back into his seat with an exhausted, sore sigh, he relinquished control of the asphalt and returned to Nesh's speed at the same moment. His hand on the controls wasn't needed anymore. The damage was done and it was going to work or it wouldn't. The missile carved a hole through the sheets of metal skin, punching through with a noise like a screaming machine. A split second later, the internal mechanisms detonated. No one would ever know, but only about a third of it actually worked. James was smart, he had some engineering skills, and he had literal magic guiding him, but he wasn't that good. It was still asphalt, after all. But it was more than enough to propel those shards of shrapnel into the internals of the creature. There wasn't even time for everyone to blink before the consequences of that strike made themselves known. Multiple different internal organs ruptured inside the dragon, all of them carrying different volatile substances, and the pseudo-organic sack of high-octane gasoline split open, suddenly exposed to the source of fire the Guardian was holding in its throat. The entire thing exploded in a deadly flash of white and orange, thick black smoke billowing out of the breach in great gouts. The shockwave hit so hard it shoved their cars backward an inch off the ground. Elle's windows shattered like special effects glass while her own retreating bumper skewed wildly to the side. The windscreen of the vehicle James was in cratered inward as a flat, jagged piece of what used to be dragon skin slammed into the middle of it, bowing the whole piece of reinforced metal inward. Their tires caught on the road again an instant later. The engines screamed in protest, the cars wobbled perilously, but the drivers kept things steady, and the group then blew past the burning corpse, Elle pulling a dramatic U-turn over the center island of the road as her mystic fuel slowly knitted the glass and tires of her car back together. The air around the blast site slapped into them like a physical thing. Smoke and ash, heat and something else, it stung the eyes and skin like acid, but it didn't stop them as they covered the last handful of blocks to where they needed to be. All that was left now was the barricades and the other Guardian, and the rest of the forces arrayed against them, and one probably very annoyed cult leader at the center of it. James didn't really know if they had an answer to that, but at the very least he had to give it a try. "I think I've got him," Chavoy spoke, and a rustling, excited energy sprung into being within Pendragon's carrier pods. They were half a mile up, soaring over deserted streets into creeping darkness that was slowly but surely killing the streetlights below them. Pendragon's newly reinforced aluminum frame keeping them in a steady glide, only mildly enhanced by a collection of dungeon tech that she had been gradually incorporating into herself. There were 6 people that Dave/Pendragon were carrying. Nate had claimed a seat early, and was their backup if things got dangerous. Deb and Frequency of Sunlight were there for any medical aid needed. Knife and Fangs had tagged along in case things got really dangerous, and the first batch of people weren't enough. Chavoy and Nikhail were here mostly because they were available on incredibly short notice and they were both proficient drone riggers. Right now they had 20 camera eyes spread out around the area, the signal amplifier built into Pendragon's frame letting them keep up fine control with their skelljacks. They had assembled, geared up, and teleported in 2 batches to an empty field roughly 60 miles away about 4 hours ago. It was still a little unsettling to Nate to watch Pendragon flatten her belly to the ground and peel back her flanks like they were car doors, but the insides of the artificial dragon that were designed for carrying people were clean, dry, and devoid of any kind of weird biological matter, so he got in. Pendragon was not large, and despite being a magically augmented aircraft, she didn't have the ability to carry infinite weight. So with the exception of Nate, who insisted, the team was selected from whom was available to be fairly light, and they kept their equipment from being too heavy as well. What was more frustrating was that the little pods they were in, held along Pendragon's sides, had about as much room as a seat in coach. Nate was pretty sure that he had an indentation in his flesh in the pattern of the rifle he was wedged against. What she lacked in size or comfort, though, Pendragon made up for by being airborne and fast. They'd taken a bit to get up, but once at cruising altitude, the Dragon could move when she wanted to. Not as fast as something with an actual jet or prop engines, but for a creature that was mostly organic, being able to clear 50 miles in under 2 hours was kind of insane. And she was still keeping moving after that sprint, too. The instant they had entered the city, everyone had known something had gone wrong. It wasn't just that it felt like a dungeon. There was a kind of invisible pressure, a dire warning to steer clear, emanating from a line in the sand they'd crossed coming in. All of them on board immediately knew that they were trapped in here, whatever that meant, and wherever here happened to be. So they set about aerial recon, looking for any sign of James or Inesh. Pendragon and Dave took them in lazy circles over major areas, while the techs deployed drones and the rest of them used what intel-gathering dungeon tech they had, and while Nate tried to take a nap. What they had found was signs of a fight, or maybe a war. Wrecked cars, crumbling buildings, a few small fires that were smothered out within minutes. No people, though, not even bodies. The city looked like a scene out of a movie that couldn't afford extras. Normally, just follow the trail of destruction would be an excellent way to find James, but it didn't really apply here. The entire city was like this. It wasn't confined to any one area. Every now and then they'd see cars moving from overhead, but by the time they got real eyes on them, they were already totaled and emptied out. As inexhaustible as Pendragon was, she did need to land eventually. So when Chavoy spoke, it was both relief and a kind of pre-action electric thrill. It was time. Time to take a deep breath and dive into the problem. "Where are they?" Dave and Pendragon's mirrored voice echoed through the interior. "How do you know it's them?" "You're 2 o'clock," Chavoy replied. "See the big road that's half lit with a big plume of smoke coming up?" She paused for a second. "2 cars just drove out of a fireball that came from something. So unless the town has turned into a Hollywood action movie—" "Oh yeah, that's them," Deb's voice was assured as she leaned back into Pendragon's form. She had gotten a lot better at just rolling with stuff like this in the last year. The frame of the Dragon shifted under them, inertia pulling the passengers around in their seats. "Spotted," the blended voice came through again. "Time to target, 2 minutes, beginning descent in 30. "Weapons check," Nate called out to everyone. "Braids in. Remember these are the new model. Pendragon will be our connection point, so Dave back in the air as soon as we're out, but don't go too far. Drop the drones, we'll retrieve them later." A series of sounds and shifting motions answered him. Nate reached back to the back of his head and clicked the Wi-Fi adapter into his own skulljack, awkwardly pinging the connection and beginning to set up incoming video and audio. Humans and camera condas calling back with ready checks as they got in position. "Remember, we're probably going in to save James, so just because something looks weird, don't shoot first," Nate reminded them. The laughs that came back twisted into yelps as Dave and Pendragon got in position overhead and began plummeting toward the ground. There were 2 streets left between them and the garage they were aiming for, assuming Elle's mother had remembered the address properly, which, if she wasn't exactly on spot, she was at least fairly close. In the right region of angry life forms and hostile roadway, anyway. The road had tried to spike their car twice more since plowing through its guardian. Quick reflexes by Inesh caught the first one, and the second actually got up through the footwell of the back seat before he noticed and broke off the attack. In that split second, it had caused irreparable damage to the vehicle, but that didn't really matter because they were almost there. Alana gunned it, getting every last erg of power out of the engine, now sputtering angrily from the damage to its machinery. She didn't dare try to pull maneuvers right now, instead just slamming the front bumper of a crashed car that was laid across the road and ramming aside an overturned motorcycle that still had its engine running. Behind them, Elle followed in the wake of clear road, the shattered windows already half mended. Then they reached the last street separating them from their destination, and Alana rolled the car to a stop. There were no streetlights here on. The surrounding businesses were dark, but the garage in question had a warm orange glow pouring out of its upper windows. It illuminated the street around it, and in that light, the road ahead of them took on a different feeling. It was a small side street, the kind that went through a city center and connected small patches of businesses for convenience, but no one ever really drove on unless they were going somewhere in particular, or really enjoyed a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. Old dirt and trees that were planted a decade ago and then forgotten lined the sides of the road. Unlike every other road around here, it was almost perfectly clear. No wrecked vehicles or scattered personal effects, no angry asphalt creeping out of line, no strange stains that everyone hoped was motor oil but knew wasn't. Instead, all it had were dozens of small plate-sized objects, pale white bordering on dull yellow, sitting in stacks all across the road's length as it wrapped around the mechanic's hideout. Alana had mentally connected them to landmines, and so she brought the car to a halt before running through them. Behind them, Elle slid her car into a similar stop, hopping out with Camille following in that impossibly elegant armored way. Alana was already out too, Anesh following, before she realized that James might not be up for it at this moment. But James was also on his feet. He had his recently acquired pistol in his hand, a stubby little revolver he'd taken off one of the cult assailants earlier. Alana also had another stolen gun, which she held proficiently, but without the confidence James seemed to have. "Oh, that's suspicious," he said glibly, raising his eyebrows at the field ahead of them. "They're gears," Elle said suddenly, voice way too loud in the quiet night air. And it was quiet. No engine noise, no distant crashes or screams. Just a nice, pleasant evening here. Just them. And a soft, organic humming coming from the building ahead. The piles of things, they're gears. "Not metal, though," James commented, his metallurgy skill kicking in. "They look off-color." Anesh sighed. "Right, well, they're obviously traps. Form up, move slow, let's..." He didn't get a chance to finish the sentence before the first pile started moving. The gears rattled first, and then began to rise up into the air. There were 5 in the stack, and they quickly took up a formation of one large central one, and 2 smaller gears to the left and right, another 2 smaller ones mirrored below those. Then the asphalt below the little formation began to flow, streamers of dark stone pooling up, forming into claw shapes that linked themselves up to the movements of the gears before surrounding them completely. The outline was a suggestion of a human form. The instant the asphalt started to cover the central gear, Anesh just shot it. Realizing that whatever weak point it might have was about to be covered shortly, he slung his P90 forward and pulled the trigger from his hip, spraying bullets into the still assembling form. His aim went a little wide, and he shredded one of the side gears first, causing a partially formed claw to drop back to the street and be reabsorbed, the asphalt pooling like water. Before he walked his fire across the central assembly and the entire thing collapsed the same way. "Hit the piles," James yelled as the other 40 stacks of gears within eyesight started to tremble and shift in the same way. He didn't hesitate, snapping off all the bullets in his revolver into a group that was starting to rise up, killing the core and leaving the rest of the bone gears to drop to the pavement and shatter. As his allies opened up on everything in sight, James reloaded with shaking hands, popping the chamber and dumping the spent casings, and pushed bullets into the cylinders in the first manual reload he'd done in months. He got 1 shot off before the first of the automatons finished forming and rushed at him. James frantically ducked a claw before a kick took him in the chest, and he realized these things did not need legs to stand. They were hovering street puppets, of course. Why would they need legs? Alana came to his rescue, punching the one on him from behind so hard it snapped the central gear in two and the whole thing collapsed before it could claw through his coat. But there were more and more of them closing in, and the rapid bursts Inesh was laying down on the unshielded ones weren't enough. They were starting to cover themselves up, their claws were starting to fully form, the tips of their lower feet hovering just over the road, their central bodies turning into cones that held the entire thing together. "We'll be overwhelmed shortly," Camille shouted, letting claws rake over her armor while she dispatched two of the creations. She was breathing a little heavily, but it felt hard to believe that she was in danger of being overwhelmed. James should have trusted her, though. A second later, more of the things, these ones now fully formed, rounded the corner. Then another pack from the other direction. And then, stomping after the smaller humanoid ones, came a creation that balanced on 3 spikes and held 3 hovering claws around its core, each of them the size of a small car. "Shit!" James yelled, distracting Inesh, who took a scything claw across his armored chest as he turned to look. The hard shell he was wearing took most of the damage, but it severed the strap of his rifle, and the impact caught his arm, jerking him sideways and sending his gun spiraling across the road. James caught his other arm and stabilized him, but the group was getting pushed closer together by the advancing mass of targets. The creations were relentless. They did not move like dungeon life, they moved like fucking Terminators. There was no hesitation or predator tactics, no concern for their allies or their own health. They just advanced and swung their rough claws at high speeds. James awkwardly yanked his sword from his belt and caught a strike, months of practice with JP and Inesh turning the parry into a riposte that cracked the small, tiny bit of exposed arm gear and dropped the melting claw to the ground. His hands stung from the force of the impact, but the blade at least held against it. The air was quiet again. Alana and Elle out of ammo very suddenly, the cracks and booms of their pistol and shotgun having faded away. Camille continued to punish anything that dared try to hurt her, but she wasn't in a position to cover the rest of them. "We have got to break through," James yelled, giving ground along with everybody else, trying to keep from having to fight a new automaton every 5 seconds. He set his shield bracer to road, caught 2 hits intended for Alana's skull, stabbed and missed at a tiny bit of exposed gear. He tried to keep his breathing even. "We cannot keep fighting here," he added. Elle turned her head to glance back at her car and then nodded. "I'll get—" Whatever she was planning died with a scream as one of the creations slammed a claw into her flank, and another one stomped down on her calf as she fell. Camille shouted something and slammed a plated kick through the core of that one creature, but 3 more stepped up to the plate to cover them. The big one hadn't even engaged them, just ominously interposing itself between their group and the garage. "Inesh, back!" James tried to yell, but he found his voice hoarse and dry. He lashed out with a spike of intent, manipulate asphalt catching a strike midway to Inesh's head and starting to pull the claw apart before he lost control of the claimed material. Inesh tilted his head sideways, a flash of anger on his face as he flared his own blue absorbed power. Only he played it smarter than James did. Select, careful pressure to the asphalt around the core, and the central gear just snapped in half, sending the remains of the creature dropping. "Cam, can you punch us through?" James yelled. But Camille was too busy to answer. The creatures had begun focusing on her, almost 20 of them stepping forward in a military march precision to separate her and back her against a wall on the other side of the block. She was managing to cut them down, but it was obvious now that she did not have an unlimited amount of strength. She looked like she was getting tired faster than the rest of them. It was, James realized, pretty damn optimistic of them to think they could make this work. A foolish attack against a prepared, entrenched enemy. "We have to get out of here," he muttered. They'd been backed up to the hood of their ruined, pilfered car. He and Alana were fighting side by side. It was, he almost laughed, kind of exactly what he'd wanted. Just maybe without the impending death. One of the automatons lunged, and James caught the middle of its claw with the blade of his sword. Before it could pressure him with the force of the blow, he panically triggered the perfected strike ability on his earring, the blade suddenly finding exactly the right position and force, shearing into the claw just a little bit, bisecting the gear controlling it. We're not going to make it. His breathing was getting rough. Terror was starting to set in. There were still at least 30 of these things left, and the big one. Elle was still alive, and they'd cover her as she'd gotten back behind them, but she was bleeding, and they were going to keep taking damage, and there weren't, James thought, many things they could do to turn this around. But they had to, because this was it. They either pulled something out of their ass or the town got destroyed tomorrow, and they were still in the town. He just didn't have that much left to pull. This made it the perfect moment for Pendragon to land in the street. The dragon smashed down into the middle of the pack of creatures that were shoving them back, and instantly the dynamic of the field shifted. It wasn't the most tactically sound place to land, unless the tactic you were going for was buying breathing room for a team of idiots that had gotten in over their heads. Her wings thrown wide, the big girl's flanks opened up, and members of the Order spilled out onto the road, landing nearly in unison on the street and engaging the creatures that were left. Nate had told them not to fire just because something didn't look human, and they didn't, but they had seen enough of the skirmish on the way down. So Nate shifted from target to target with the training of a practiced soldier, putting out 3 on-target shots to each of them before realizing that the head wasn't where these things needed to be hit. The unit silently sent mental updates to each other, aims shifted, and the area around Pendragon started to clear. Deb turned as soon as the fight did, and rushed Elle with a medical bag already half open. The 2 Camercondas made use of their abilities to stop incoming strikes, opening up finishing blows. Knife and Fangs also had a set of modified Camerconda arms, almost inflexible, but capable of acting as a kind of weapons platform for one of their favored rifles. He was picking off his own stationary targets, one of their gun bracelets worn as a necklace under his armor. The odds tipped. The fight turned. Pendragon braced herself and leapt back into the air, clearing the road and leaving an expanding crescent of space around the team as they chewed through the bone and stone creatures. Many of them still not fully concealed, their gears poking out of their asphalt bodies at odd angles, making them vulnerable enough. "James!" Ethan yelled, underhand lobbing a bundle of cables over to the leader of the Order. James caught them with a free hand, shaking loose one of the braids and dropping the other 2 down to Inesh. Both of them plugged one in. James was going to offer one to Alana, but then the larger creature started to move. They had apparently been upgraded in terms of threat. "Incoming," Nate sent over the relay. "More of them moving from the left. Ethan, Chavoy, take that side. Fall back from the big guy." "We need to get through to the interior," James fired off the message with a thought. "These things are moving like robots." He didn't need to add that the target would be the assumed controller. "Big one's in the way," Chavoy sent across the network. "Ideas?" James paused as he felt Inesh draw his own blade at his side. Then he felt more as Inesh made a mental nudge toward him, the signal strong enough that they could actually connect, stronger than it should have been. He opened himself up, let his mind be vulnerable to this other person, and then they were the same person. Still afraid, but they had a combined plan. "Give us a corridor," James and Inesh sent together. Inesh's body was exhausted, but as soon as he and James were unified, endurance kicked in for him, too, and gave him what he needed to keep going. Just a little more determination to push through, to make it to the end. James suddenly felt his pool of velocity begin to refill, felt his body's vision sharpen, and also felt a tooth he hadn't realized had been knocked out of his mouth in the fight start to painfully regrow. In front of them, Nate and Ethan overlapped their fields of fire, letting the flanks advance as they tried to gun down anything that was directly between them and the giant creature that was stomping their way, leaving little molten divots in the road as it did so. James and Inesh could see notifications coming in from everyone over the link of concern that the giant creature was about 2 ponderous steps away from murder range, but they didn't back off. The 2 bodies stabilized each other in a physical gesture of good luck, even as their minds plotted out a course of action, and started moving. James and Inesh broke into a sprint, rushing past Nate on either side, taking full advantage of James's shell upgrade now applied to both bodies. The towering automaton rotated its center, one of its 3 claws descending on them at high speed, but the two of them flexed their collective blue power, one organic mind manipulating the asphalt long enough to freeze it in place, the other one peeling back layers around the legs' gear-like petals of a flower. They ducked underneath, triggered the status quo earring's ability to flawlessly strike something twice, and let their blades meet the armored bone gear overhead from opposite sides. The cuts passed effortlessly through the material, and behind them, the 2-ton chunk of rock slammed into the ground with a liquid ripple as it all began to melt. They swept forward, legs and arms burning, lungs on fire, but moving with a unified momentum, and repeated the process to one of the legs. The creature might, James and Inesh realized, have needed legs more than expected after all. As the larger tripod started to topple wildly as it lost one of its support pillars, the arm claws falling away, shredding a nearby tree and smashing a roadside mailbox into a pancake, but not hitting anything as the entire apparatus collapsed. And then they were past, at one of the garage's big metal shutters, past the horde, past the fight. They were almost at their goal. "Go," Nate sent across the network. "We're covering." So the 2 bodies that were currently one person ran along the side of the building to the back door, a metal security door with flaking paint and a rusting handle. Inesh's body pulled their one surviving thermite grenade from the coat and wedged it between the handle and the wall before carefully pulling the pin and stepping back just a bit, orange sparks eating through the metal. There was an arcane hiss as whatever trap was supposed to kill anyone who tried to open the door burned away, and then the thermite tumbled to the ground along with the molten hunk of what used to be a door handle. They kicked the door open and moved in, swords up. The inside of the garage caught both of them off guard. Through their combined minds, they compared and contrasted how they saw the place. Inesh saw a great machine, lines of mathematical engineering drawn out in reality through interlocking gears and engine components. The entire thing, he recognized, was a tool designed to be used for something. James, in contrast, saw an altar, a religious site. The orange glow coming from the light sources around the expansive area were shaded and placed so they could feel like candlelight, while being nothing more than color-tinted shop lamps. The machinery that had been dissected and reassembled to cover the walls and ceilings, to create a dome that felt like being under the hood of a monstrous vehicle, wasn't so much meant to do something as feel a certain way. Both of them were probably right, and their combined view shared that thought collectively. On the far side of the bay, wearing oil-stained overalls and carefully adjusting something with a screwdriver, was a man. He was balding, looked a little over 50, and was shaking his head in mild annoyance, seemingly impervious to the gunfire that was still sounding outside. At James and Inesh's entry, he finished what he was working on and turned, revealing that what he had been working on was a frame in the shape of a human. It was sunk into the wires and pipes and pistons that coated the walls. It was almost certainly meant for him. It was his height, and while James and Inesh couldn't see his exact dimensions, it just felt like there wasn't anyone else it could be for. On the opposite side of the mechanics bay, a little bit to their left, was a similar indentation. This one was sized for someone much smaller, who James and Inesh were pretty sure they had already met. "Made it past the army, eh?" The mechanic spoke first. "With swords? Ain't that fucking insulting. I should have made him better. But, whatever. Rush job, you know?" He flapped a hand, dismissing the topic with a spiteful look. "So, what do you want?" the old man demanded of them. "For you to stop." James and Inesh let their bodies speak in unison. "You need to unanchor the dungeon, or—" "That fucking thing?" The mechanic's voice was a rude, loud, and angry one. He made a sound like he was dragging something out of his throat and then spat to the side. "Knew that whole club was a mistake. Bunch of parasites. Idiots couldn't even catch a single kid. What's the point?" He looked James up and down. "You'd probably make a good one, huh? You seem big on the whole hero angle." "It's the sword, right? It makes the look," James and Inesh said. Well, mostly James. Inesh's mind was busy doing the mental equivalent of a facepalm as his partner's words flowed through both of them. But seriously, their twin voices said, shut down your little army. There's still time to end this mostly peacefully. Nah, there fucking ain't, the mechanic yelled, spittle forming on the corner of his mouth as he flung his screwdriver to the side in a sudden outburst of anger. It's never been fucking peaceful, don't you get it? Everyone just wants to take from me. Take my work, take my magic, take my god. Well, I'm sick of it. I am sick of being stolen from. The mechanic leaned back and crossed his arms. Jameson and Ash caught sight of an old faded name tag on the chest. Bob, it read. To be clear, the paired boys spoke, we have no interest in taking away your magic. This is all very impressive. If you're willing to share, that's fine, but you are getting people killed, and... The mechanic, pacing over to a workbench in the middle of the room, barked out an interruption. Ah, fuck 'em. He cut the two off. Not like they matter, anyway. Excuse me? Jameson and Ash were both shocked, though in different ways, at the words. You heard me. Fuck 'em. The mechanic stuck a cigar between his lips and carefully lit the end with an old lighter. You already know, I bet. Fucking cutting your way in here with swords. You're strong. You've got the right blood in you, don't you? You already know. Everyone else is just going to try to take that away from you. They're going to ask you to do favors until you're worn down and weak like they are. I'm not having it. Oh, so people die. So what? People die all the time. I've survived everything life has thrown at me. I deserve a little reward. He gazed reverently at the human-shaped creches he had built into his walls. I'm going to be a god, he muttered. Just like the lady told me so. I know it'll work, too. Just need the right materials. Jameson and Ash conferred within their combined minds for a brief moment. He was obviously trying to make them mad, trying to control the flow of conversation. It wasn't working. They had the drop on him. He was stalling, so there was something here he needed them to not notice or do anything about. One of their bodies kept talking while the other one scanned the room. Okay, putting aside how fucking psychopathic that sounds, Jameson and Ash spoke calmly, trying not to set this guy off any more than he already was. Surviving everything so far is the default state of being alive. Everyone has survived their whole life. That's what being alive is. I'm not sure why you think you should be rewarded for that. Rewards are for accomplishing something. Maybe you could, I don't know, build something that helps people? Be a hero instead of someone trying to kill a whole city? People tend to like heroes more than murderers. The mechanic just laughed at them. Fucking heroes, he spat again onto his own floor. You think you're so special? 'Cause you got morals or some shit? Ha! That makes me laugh. Outside, gunfire echoed in waves of sound. You're letting everyone take advantage of you. Couple of obedient little bitches, aren't you? Ah, it was simple, they realized suddenly. The one place the mechanic was never looking, and that they couldn't look. There was a single spot on the ceiling. James's body drew his revolver, still loaded from the start of the fight, and emptied all but the last couple of rounds into whatever weird machine was gently humming up there. Oil fountained down like black blood, small waterfalls of it pooling on the floor as the mechanic screamed in fury at them. All of a sudden, all the vigor seemed to go out of the man. No longer was he a mildly balding mid-50s guy, but somebody much older, much more battered. Wrinkled skin and liver spots, sunken eyes, bony hands, and gnarled knuckles. He looked like he'd lived a hard life for the last 120 years. The shooting outside stopped. No! The mechanic tried to scream, but his voice tore in his throat halfway through. No, you'll let it escape! I have... He scrambled on his bench for tools, staring up at the beating engine heart that hung suspended from the ceiling, the no longer so hidden centerpiece of the whole room. Around them, the world eased. The electric salt smell of being in a dungeon faded away, pulling back, though it didn't disappear entirely. Let it go, Jameson and Ash said. Please, you're going to get yourself killed if you don't let it go. You can't keep anchoring the horizon here. You, the mechanic spun on them, eyes literally glowing with fury. You did this! Stupid fucking outsiders coming in and ruining everything, just like always, trying to steal from me, trying to take everything away, take my power away, just like everyone else. His hands scattered objects off the workbench as he stumbled, searching for something. Won't let you. Won't! His voice was little more than a wheeze as he knocked a bucket of screws to the floor and lifted a sawn-off shotgun off the bench in a trembling hand. He got halfway to pointing it toward Inesh's body when James abruptly broke the connection between them and shot the mechanic twice in the head. The body dropped lifelessly to the floor, whatever defenses he might have thought he had already gone, never there in the first place, or simply ineffective against .45 caliber ammunition. James let his arms drop to the side as the dungeon feeling abated instantly. The sensation of high-speed traffic carrying the last remnants of the dungeon's forced claim on the outside world back to where it came from. The revolver clattered to the floor as his exhausted fingers let it drop, and he shook his head, partially trying to keep his tired eyes open and partially in frustration. Just an angry old guy. All of this because one guy was pissed at the world, he muttered. Inesh set a cautious hand on his boyfriend's shoulder. You all right? He asked. You kicked me out there. I didn't want you to, you know. James waved at the cooling corpse, blood pooling beneath it with the oil. 'Cause it sucks, he clarified. Self-defense. Defense in general, really, Inesh told him. I'm not going to say you had to do it or anything trite like that, but he wasn't going to let it be any other way, and we both knew it. Yeah, James sighed. Okay, I'm okay. I'll be... He took a shuddering breath. I'll be fine eventually, he admitted quietly. Inesh hugged him as Nate and Deb burst through the door behind them, guns up, ready for anything. Clear! Nate shouted as he swept the room before approaching James. All right, now what? He asked, uncertainty creeping in for the first time since he'd landed. We still can't leave, unless you know something I don't, so what's our next move? More of this? He waved a free hand at the religiously composed machinery around them, the other hand keeping his gun steady. Oh shit, I need to talk to Camille, James said quietly, another tremor of fear going through his hands. Nate, can you... He made an ambiguous hand gesture, and the other man just stared at him until he elaborated. Get everyone ready, James said. Ah, Nate said. He blinked, and James saw Inesh and Deb react as the ping went out through the networked link. Done. James stumbled outside through the rear door, the big metal shutters of the garage sealed shut from the inside with various arcane constructions the mechanic had been working on. There were piles of shattered bone gears and bullet casings littering the road, but the surface was back to being smooth, all the pieces of the creations having melted back in seamlessly. Elle was laid out over on the sidewalk a block away, being watched over by Alana. The other Order Knights, human and Cameronda both, were watching a rough perimeter for any more problems. And Camille was leaned against the rough brick wall of a bank, next to an ATM that hadn't made it through the fight intact. Her armor looked like it had seen better days, but it was still mostly there, just beaten up, dented, scratched, but not broken. A lot like her, too. There was a cut on her forehead, blood matting her short blonde hair into an angry scab, and bruises underneath her face. But she was awake and alive. Hey, James said, sinking down opposite her, leaning up against a telephone pole. Greetings, she nodded once at him. You did what you said you would. Yeah, I had some help, he told her. Got lucky. Oh? She raised an eyebrow. Your people acted on their own initiative to find and assist you. They were equipped and prepared for the situation. This is not luck. Camille's eyes slid sideways to where Nate was taking up a sentry position near them, a lit cigarette in his mouth. This is loyalty, she said, staring at the orange ember in the dark night of the city. Maybe, James conceded. Could be both. Could be, indeed. Camille almost smiled. We're probably alive because you helped, James told her, switching subjects. We owe you. A lot. I saw you take a hit for Alana back there. I just owe you one. He cleared his throat. Thanks for being with us. You were correct, after all, she told him, voice still unwavering, detached, almost disassociated. And so we are victorious. We are. James looked over at the injured, exhausted woman. She seemed so tired, beyond even himself. Come with us, he said suddenly. Again, but more. Join us. I haven't met your father figure, but I've encountered things like him. It can't be a good life, and I saw you. I saw how much you want to be a hero. We can give you that. We can give you an actual home. Camille opened her mouth and then closed it again. She looked at James like she was seeing him for the first time. She paused. You don't need to decide right now, James told her. But we're going to try to leave soon, assuming your dad drops the barrier. He will already be gone. Camille shook her head sadly. Nothing left to defend against. It is his way. The truth was confirmed shortly, as Deb teleported out with an injured Elle in tow. James sat with Camille, both of them lightly dozing, but also watching the scene around them, and each other, as members of the Order began flowing in and out via telepad. They coordinated with Nate, who had gotten a bigger picture view from Anesh, searching the area, widening their net to begin scouring the city for survivors and holdouts. There were parts of Taunton where the arbitrary claim the dungeon was forced into hadn't taken hold, where property was never sold and there wasn't a foot in the door. Some of those people had probably survived the night. Others had probably been overrun by more of the bone and road automatons or other creations of the mechanic or the dungeon. The automatons were his creations, too. The knights found several sites and hidden garages throughout the city where hundreds, maybe thousands of bodies had been taken. The dead being methodically processed into fused and carved bone, used to power the little road warriors. Eventually they found how he'd done it, too. He'd kept extensive notes, which were useless now without the anchor that bound the nearby dungeon. Those, along with large quantities of the mechanic's tools, just in case they were magic, were ferried out to a secluded location that research would use to pore over them and try to get anything of constructive value. All they were left with was the garage itself. What will you do with the machine? Camille asked, startling James out of his nap. It was several hours later, the two of them having been left to their own devices after being declared medically stable. The one he planned to use to make himself a god, she asked. Oh, burn it down, James said. Or something like that. I don't know if it'll burn. Get rid of it. No point keeping it since we don't, use humans as raw materials. He shrugged idly. You can't have it, by the way. I don't care if your dad could beat me up. No one should have something like that. He turned his head, frowning at the building behind him, still glowing with that inviting orange light. Yes, Camille said. Yes, you want it? James tensed up. The still armored girl shook her head. No. Yes, I will join you, she said. I would like to, I think. Okay, James sighed, relaxed. Nearby, Nate noticed and calmly released his vigilant grip on his rifle. I'm gonna nap. We'll get out of here with the next exit crew, okay? I too would like sleep, Camille added. The two of them drifted off, leaning against equally uncomfortable structures. 6 hours later, as the sun was beginning to peek through the horizon, between aerial sweeps from Pendragon and several long-range red orb totems that Momo teleported in, the Order had begun to verify there were no further survivors in the city. Everyone they had found, they teleported out, handed off to recovery to begin the long process of managing temporary housing, contacting family, putting destroyed lives back together, and recovering what could be found from the demolished town. There was, nowhere, any news about Taunton vanishing off the map. A smaller town in Canada had been consumed by a forest fire, and that had gotten more press. Just another side effect of the dungeon's anti-memetics at work. Jean and Ava were safe, along with Elle's mom, Marjorie. All three of them back at the lair, getting special treatment beyond being put up in a hotel temporarily. No one knew exactly what to do with the cultists who had lived through the event, so they treated them like every other victim, but kept tabs on their number to sort out later, and made sure they knew that they were not to leave town. There had been, at rough estimate, 3,000 to 5,000 people in the city when James and Inesh had arrived. A large number of those had fled when the last line of defense cordoned off the city, something having let them know that they needed to get out of town. Personally, James thought the dungeon had done it, though he didn't know how, or maybe it was just human instinct, a herd mentality on a large scale, warning everyone of a storm that was coming in. Of the remaining population, however large it was after that exodus, they found 351 survivors. The butcher's bill was steep on this one, though at least those people hadn't lost their record and the memory of their friends and family. The town was completely empty now, except for a curious population of possums and raccoons, the last sophant life being 3 members of the Order who were acting as security, James and Inesh who insisted on being there until the end, and Camille. Someone wrote the address of their home on the telepad. Inesh clapped a hand on James's shoulder, linking arms with Nate, and James offered a hand to Camille, who took it. He raised an eyebrow at the feeling of a piece of paper pressing into his palm from her, and opened his mouth to say something, but then the page was torn and they teleported away. 5 people arrived in the lair's teleport landing platform, James's hand extended to empty air, Camille nowhere in sight. He looked down at the scrap of paper in his hand. "You've passed the test," it read. "Well, fuck," James muttered with a sigh. "Report." The last line of defense did not look up from the sheaf of papers it was flipping through, sitting cross-legged against a bullet-riddled boulder 40 kilometers outside Kabul. Camille tilted her head in deference to her senior sister who was watching the road, waited to be acknowledged, and then knelt and spoke. "They are untrained, inexperienced, foolish, reckless, and naive," she said in her uninterested voice. And then, with the slightest hint of a smile, added, "And, as you said, they did the right thing." "Their type almost always do," the last line of defense nodded idly, not caring. "It is important to check." "They offered me a home," Camille said spontaneously. The information had not been asked for. She did not know why she offered it. The last line of defense didn't even look up. "They do that as well, sometimes," it said. "It is, I believe, a part of how the successful ones get as far as they do. Oh, do shield your ears," it said suddenly. Overhead, a heavily armed U.S. military drone expended a part of its payload. 3 guided cluster munitions slammed into the empty ground nearby, turning a portion of the local hills into a thunderous inferno in an instant. Far away, commanders and technicians would see a successful strike on a terrorist training camp. Here and now, the last line of defense saw the death of a particularly aggressive dungeon's entrance. "This part of the world is so much easier to work in," it sighed in contentment as the job was completed to satisfaction. Rising to its feet, it folded the pages it carried and set them alight with a thought, more burning debris adding to what was already nearby. "Our next incursion will be in London. Join me there in 1 week's time." It paused, and then careful concern reached its eyes. The last line of defense reached out and smoothed a hand along Camille's damaged armor. Scarred and dented metal healed instantly under a gentle touch, only the girl's bloodstains left behind to mark it. "Much better. And congratulations, daughter, on your successful operation." Then it was gone, leaving the 2 girls in the rocks. Camille raised a bare hand to feel the refreshed armor, wincing as doing so pulled at the mass of bruises that her shoulder and left half of her face currently were. She felt like sighing, suddenly, for some reason, but held it in. Her sister was here, watching her as much as the road. "London, then," she said aloud. "London, then," her sister echoed in an identical voice. "I shall see you there, sister."